So interior purlins, same spacing as the trusses. So if this is 10 foot on center, that's going to be a 10-foot purlin. Again, that could be 8, 10, 12. You might say, why should I pick a particular spacing? First of all, how strong does it need to be? 10 foot by far is what we're going to figure most of the time. If your building is 50 foot long, easier to do that in 10 foot increments. If your building is 48 foot, you could do that in 12s or possibly 8s. We probably do that in 12s more often, depending on the size of the building. So it depends on what your spacing is. If your building is 24 foot long, we could do 12s or 8 foot on center. So 10 foot, in most cases, people order buildings by far in increments of 10. So 10 foot spacing is more often what you'll see. Edge purlins, it's got an extra 1.5 foot overhang. And then after those are set, you're going to determine your overhang, and usually 18 inches, and measure for the bottom purlin, measure for the top purlin, go ahead and cut those off. So if it was 12 foot, but you want a 1.5 foot overhang, figure out where you want that, because depending on where you set your roof truss, if it's set more towards the inside or outside, you want to measure from where you want that overhang to be, and just cut the bottom one, cut the top one, pop a line, and then use that as a straight edge to cut all the rest. So at that point, don't worry as much about where the metal truss is at. Don't follow the metal truss if there's any variance in that. Follow what overhang you want. The metal truss is going to support it. Where you cut those rafters off at, where you cut those roof purlins off at, is going to determine your overhang. Briefly, and you'll see this better in the building, so I won't dwell on it. For your wall girts, so first of all, we always figure a treated wall girt for the bottom, and it's closer to the ground, and that's just industry standard. So we're always going to figure treated wall girts. Other than that, 2 foot on center is typical. Some reasons you might want to change from that is if you have a wainscot. So some people want a 3 foot or 4 foot different colored panel at the bottom. And if you do that, you want to make sure a board is right there at that level to account for the double angle that's installed there. And so in that case, you might want to, in our team, if we know that ahead of time, we'll go ahead and show that in the drawings. We'll plan for that board to be there. Another reason you might want to adjust the spacing is if you have a whole bunch of windows all in a line and you know that they need to be 3 foot 4 up or whatever, it's easier to go ahead and plan for a wall girt to be at the bottom edge of that window and possibly top edge to go ahead and fasten those windows too, so you don't have to do as much cutting and as much additional framing in for those windows. A lot of times, if you're planning on fully enclosing, if you're planning on doing soffit, a lot of times that's done later because you're working through all the process from the roof to the fascia to the soffit to the wall. So typically we're going to recommend that if you are enclosing those soffits especially, but even if you're not, just leave that top board off while you install the rest of those until you know where you want that board to be for your J channels or your back-to-back Js or your FJs to be able to support the top of the wall panel and also to support the fascia. So just keep that in mind, is that top board, if you install it now and you don't really know where it needs to go, you might have to take it off later. So these are not to fasten anything to, they're to help brace the building. They're to help brace the roof trusses. So again, whether you install inside cups first for support, or whether you install roof purlins first, just see how those help keep everything tight, so it'll support in between roof trusses. This only has 2, but again, if you had a 50-foot building, you'll end up with 6 roof trusses if they're 10-foot centered. So just keep that in mind. Each building is going to be a little different as far as what you're looking to do. This one's going to be, if we could have done a 20-foot long building in this space, you would see an additional post, and things would be a little different as far as laying out some of those inside and outside panels. So again, those are just being fastened with a black metal roof screw. Doesn't have to be black. It just looks nice with the Purlin cup, since those are black. But that's what we figure by default with our kits are some black metal roof screws. 1.5 inch long. There's already a pre-drilled hole to space those. Notice that these cups are a J-channel, so the screws are offset, so they don't end up hitting the screw on the other side if you just hit them dead on. The inside purlins will vary depending on the building design. So the wider the truss, the more chance it'll have additional supports. But those cups will already be there. So if there were multiple, 3 or 4 bays, your very first roof purlin would be only overhanging on one edge, and then it would go to the middle of the cup on the interior bays. So just keep that in mind. In this case, because we're doing from one to the other, we have overhangs on each side, in this case about 12 inches. But that would be a little different if you had multiple bays. You'd go straight to the middle of that cup. That way, the next purlin would go from the center of this cup to the center of the next one. And you can see that on our little display here is how those butt together as well. The most common overhangs, again, are about 18 inches on the gables. On the eaves, the most common is about 18 inches on slope. So it's 18 inches from edge down to here on the slope. So that actual flat measurement will depend a little bit on the pitch. And also that's going to be affected later by our wall girts. So that's partly why we don't really want to start planning out that top wall girt for our soffit until we get ready to really know where that's going to fall at, where the walls in the roof is going to come together and make that soffit to fascia connection. In this case, they've already pre-measured and pre-cut. In a real world scenario, most of the time what you're going to be doing is, again, these are going to come 12 foot long. So we figure the panels for an 18-inch overhang. And so what you would do is you run them long, remembering that where this steel purlin's at doesn't matter as much as where you want your fascia to fall. So you make sure you get your bottom purlin cut at the overhang, get the top purlin cut at the overhang, and then pop a line on all the rest of those roof purlins and just cut them all at that, so you know your fascia is nice and straight. So one thing you'll see is how that lean-to truss is underneath of the main roof. Just keep that in mind anytime you're talking about wall heights and clearances. Two things can't exist in the same space. So, your main building must be high enough to count for clearance. And that's where I really recommend, if you're not sure if 10-foot lean-tos and a 14-foot main building will work with your length of lean-tos, just send it in. We'll figure it out. And we'll either just send it back and it'll be what you asked for, or we'll tell you the only way to do that is to have your lean-tos be 7-foot high eve measurement. You might want to raise that up. Megan? That's an excellent point. So if you're going from a roof to a lean-to and you want to have a transition instead of an in-wall scenario, we can do that. We just have to plan it out. So we would raise that wall on the lean-to be the right height to where you can go straight from the main roof down to the lean-to in a planned fashion and still make sure your walls are tall enough and your posts are tall enough to really give you the clearance you need on that lean-to. Your lean-tos can also be installed on the gable ends. You still have to worry about the same type of clearance issue that you would on the eave ends. It's just, it's not installed in line with the roof purlins. So if we had if we wanted to put a small lean-to and there wasn't a door here, or if you wanted to put a small lean-to over the door, we could provide a lean-to for this side as well. You still just have to think about what wall height your main building needs to be to account for whatever wall height you're trying to aim for on your lean-to. And if it's not critical, if you just know you want a 12-foot lean-to, you can just tell us kind of where you think you'll be falling, and we can help give some guidance on that as well. Notice they're using an impact driver for these screws. That's because they're just to secure it in place. When we get to our roof panels and our wall panels, and it's going to be a sealed gasket, we're going to move over to a traditional drill. So that way you don't over tighten those screws and smash your washers out and strip out your screws where they don't really have a good bite into the wood. So keep that in mind. Impacts are great for non-washered screws or washered screws that are more just there to help hold it in place. But when you get into your roof and wall panels and trim, you want to move over to the traditional drill where you can set your torque. So for the most part, most of these are spaced about 2 foot apart on the purlin cups. The exceptions are going to be at the eave overhang. It's going to be one that falls right about where the post is and one that falls at the bottom of the overhang, so about 18 inches. And then at the very top, you'll see an additional purlin cup to make sure you can hit where you need to hit for the top of the panel and the ridge cap. One thing to mention is, how long can you or should you wait before you put your trusses up and before you put your roof purlins up. So what you don't want to do is wait 3 or 4 months and have your wood sitting there for a long period of time, have a chance to start twisting. We don't recommend green, untreated, uncured wood. It's just too unpredictable. So what we figure for all of our kits is treated posts, treated skirt board, and all of it. None of it's green. There's some different thoughts on that. Some people say if you do you seal the ends, you can use green wood. We would just not recommend that ourselves. If you want to go on a limb and do it yourself, and it starts twisting and warping on you, you're taking on that risk. We don't recommend that. In this case, they're just kind of going down the line. Again, you would not have to install all those roof purlins just in a line like that. You could also just, as you're working down the roof, just make sure you got the bottom, you got the top. You may have some of your inside cuts for spacing and support. And then you can install a lot of your in-between, maybe every other roof purlin. And once you get to that point, you can start thinking about taking out your wall supports. So that way, you got everything tied together. It's not going to start falling over on you. Everything's tied to the opposite side and tied to something next to it. And you can start taking some of those wall supports out. You can also just wait until you're ready to put up your roof girts in that area. Just wait until something gets in the way, take it out then. So one of the things you'll notice is this is the very lower one, and he's added an additional board to help kind of bridge that gap down to his soffit. There are a number of ways to go from a fascia to soffit, and you can find them online. This is not the only way to do that, but this is one effective way to bridge that gap. And you'll see that once we get into that soffit area, fascia area. Another note, when you're looking at the gable end posts, we do try to figure those full length when we can. When you can't install full length posts, you're going to have to do some extra work to frame out supports. So if this went all the way up to the top, you may have to cut a notch on the post to get it all the way up to where you want to get with your specific fascia and soffit. But there's a lot of ways to trim that out. And we do try to figure full height posts on the gable ends where the height of the building and the height of our materials allows that. And so that just makes it easier and stronger on your gable ends. Wall girts. So the bottom board, again, if we want to set that level, so that's where a rotary laser really would help get the bottom of that or the top of that girt. So where even if your ground isn't perfectly graded, and the bottom of your posts aren't all at the same level, that very first board sets your bottom of your panel, and you can make sure your panels don't have to kind of start being cut. You don't have to cut off the bottom to keep them straight, or really adjust the length of the panels, except for on your gable ends. 2 foot on center, typical from there. Again, if we had used a half bracket on these corners, we wouldn't have needed this extra wood support. So that has a benefit. I think in most cases, either cutting off that wet set, turning into a half bracket wet set, or just going ahead and using a half bracket universal anchor is going to give you a benefit of not having to worry about installing a block like that. So in this case, he's already went through the work of figuring out where his soffit needs to fall, where his bird box is going to tie in. If he had not done that, we would leave this board out till later. So he didn't just install them 2 foot on center. You'll notice that's not 2 foot on center. Even if these were supposed 10 foot high walls, You might say, well, I can just do 2 foot. It'll fall, it'll fall, it'll fall. That top one, because your overhang and your soffit is not going to fall the same as the rest ever. But you still need something to fasten those trims to. Sorry.
He screwed that one to the bottom hole to the top hole, or one.
Excuse me. So they're fastening these with a 3-inch deck screw. It just gives you enough good wood to bite through the 1.5 inch of the wall girt, and then a good 1.5 inch into the post. You can also use ring-shaped nails. The same thing. You want something that has good pull out and enough length to really hold it in place and not just kind of tack it up. These are not just to hold the panels in place. These are also strengthening the building as well. So you want those done. So another thing, as you're looking at this is outside corner to outside corner, and it's one shot. In a general, your very first is going to go from outside corner to the center of the post. So that's what your post layout's going to be planned for. So that way, from there on, no matter how many bays you have, if you're using 10-foot girts, your posts are set 10 foot on center. You're still going to end up with a 60-foot long building to allow that first post to inset that half distance. So that's why it's very important before you start drilling your holes or pouring your pad to just take a look at that post layout. Make sure where those outside corners are going to fall. You're usually at 40 by 60. I mean, the very outside of that post is at 40 and at 60. Those inside ones will not be just 10 foot on center from the first one. The very first one is set from outside to center at 10 foot. And then from there on, all the interiors are 10 foot on center. So just that's one thing that's different on the outside ones. I wish I could show that, but since we only have one bay, I can't really show that to you today. So I guess you can see the benefit, whether it's 8 foot, 10 foot, or 12 foot on center. You know that spacing compared to traditional walls, it just makes the whole process go very quickly. As with any new product, your first one's an investment. So you're going to need to slow down, and the things we talk about today may help. Do some, whether you've done traditional framing, traditional trusses, whether you've never done either, you're still going to have an investment. If you've never done a steel truss post-frame building kit, depending on the complexity of the project as to the investment you're going to spend in it, there's a lot of flexibility, but there are also some differences compared to traditional walls and traditional wood trusses. Kind of as we talked about before, for this door spacing, they're using this blocking. Those half brackets would have been nice to avoid having to have additional blocking. So whether that be turning one of these into a half bracket by cutting it off, or just using a half bracket drill set.
The half bracket, is it a thicker gauge?
No, it's the same exact type. I'll grab one and show it to you. Don't making the speakers go crazy. We also have all of these available, so you want to take a look at them afterwards. So these are heavy gauge brackets, regardless. So usually 13-inch vertical leg. They still have the smaller holes to get it in place, and then the 1/2 inch. So once you really get it where you need to get it, you drill your 1/2 inch holes so you get those exactly where you need to be. So both of them they're very heavy duty.
It just seems like the half bracket, I guess more is the metal, the wood twisting or warping. Seems like the half bracket would compromise that.
So a couple of things. So first of all, at a door, the door is if it falls right where a major support is, you might consider putting a half bracket on the side and the back. It allows you to do it at a corner. And the same thing at a corner of a building, it allows you to put them inside the wall, but yet not on the outside interfering. Where if you use a carriage bolt, it's going to pull it flush, so it doesn't interfere with any. That your heavy gauge bracket isn't extending out like this, and your nut and bolt isn't extending out like this. Those carriage bolts allow you to pull that flush. So you can use 2 of them. Now, if it's a door that's not holding up a truss, it's not structural, and most people just use 1 half bracket to keep it out of the building and out of the. You just keep it inside the wall right here. Use a carriage bolt on this side and fasten it where it's going to be within the wall. So this just gives us something to make sure we're fastening the top of the door too. And this process is going to be pretty consistent whether it's a walk-through door or roll-up door. One thing that is harder to show here is the header truss, and I wish I had some way of showing you that on this deck. So a header truss, anytime you have a roll-up door at the eave side, there's a few things we need to think about. Number one is it going to fit within the normal post spacing? So if we're 10 foot on center, you have a 10-foot door, it'll fit. It'll be behind the posts. If you have a 12-foot door, 10 foot on center, you're going to need a header truss to skip a post. And that header truss has usually an 18-inch height. You can get a low-profile, shorter one that's 12 inches. So above your door, you have to count for that. And then you also have to count for the roll-up, the actual drum as well. So keeping that in mind, if you have a 10-foot door, you need about a 14-foot wall. If it's so wide, it has to fit in 2 bays. If it only fits in 1 bay, a 12-foot will be sufficient in most cases. But if you need a header, you just have to think about the height of each component. The height of the drum cannot take up the space that a truss is taking up. So even though you have a header, your truss is still in that bay. It still has to have a space to work. Some people do some things with some welding, making their truss kind of fit around it. But generally, you want enough height to account for your drum and your header, so you don't run out of room. And again, that's the benefit too. If you're not sure, if you send your design to the estimating team and you try putting in a door in that doesn't fit, they'll tell you. They'll figure the right header. They'll tell you, you need to go with a taller wall, a shorter door. They'll tell you, they'll include the headers that are needed. So just keep that in mind that there's a lot of benefits of not just throwing a door on somewhere. We have some customers that do that. If you want to throw a door on somewhere, throw it on at the gable end where you're not having to worry about pulling up those trusses. Throw a walk door, throw a roll-up door on the gable end. As long as there's enough width and height, it'll work. But when you get into the eaves, just keep in mind that 8-foot, 10-foot, or 12-foot base spacing. So they're installing that top board to allow for the soffit and the fascia to be trim to be installed there, and also to support the top of those panels. So the top of those panels will, depending on what trim you go with, there'll be a J channel there or an FJ, depending on the type of soffit, the type of panel you're trying to bridge the gap from your fascia to your soffit to your wall. So just depending on which panels and or trim that you're using to cover those areas. Some people also don't enclose the soffit at all. It depends on what we're looking at. It's a barn, it's a shop. Having that open, they let it breathe and let it roll. There are a lot of ways to handle that, and so that there's many ways to skin a cat. Fascia board. So at the eave, your bottom roof purlin is your fascia board. Whether you extend it down to help you bridge that gap to your soffit or not, that is your fascia board. On the gable end, again, that's where you would determine your overhang, cut your bottom roof purlin, cut your top roof purlin, snap a line, cut all this flush, so your fascia board is nice and straight as you go up through there. So it's more important that you have the right overhang than that you measure out from the steel purlin, from the steel truss. So just make sure that that's what your focus is on that point, is what overhang do you want from the edge of your building. So if in this situation we're going to leave this bay open because we're only going to enclose 2 walls. So these are the 2 walls we're going to enclose just to be able to show you all the concepts and the flashing. If we were enclosing the whole building, we would be additionally adding wall girts, and then at that point, depending on the distance between the bottom of the lean-to, the top of the lean-to and the bottom of the main roof is how we're going to fill that in. If it's a short distance, you might use a trim. If it's a taller distance, you're going to use wall panels and in wall to go to the lower roof and upper wall for that. So in this case, we don't have to worry about those details, but because it's going to be open on these 2 walls. But in a fully enclosed building, you're still going to have to make sure you're accounting for covering everything. So any wall panels need something to fasten to, and any wall that you're enclosing, when we figure it, we're going to be including the panels, the drip cap or rat guard at the bottom, the J channel at the top, the outside corner, etc. So if we have a lean-to that it's a fully enclosed building, we're going to figure those details so you have the right Girts panels and flashing to do that. So this is the eave trim. So our fascia is going to slip in behind that. One of the things is talking to Noah about the order things were going to be installed in, so I could make sure I kind of had an idea where he's going to install things in. Because you can install the walls first, you can install the soffit first, you can install the roof first. But as he mentioned, in real world situation, you can install the roof first. You want to get everything under the dry. So even if it's less convenient to do that, even if we have to tuck a flashing behind a flashing, in a real world scenario, you're going to have to deal with it. So let's deal with it.